Good afternoon. I will start off with a statement on Sudan. The Secretary General strongly condemns the violence and reports of the excessive force used by security personnel on civilians that have resulted in the deaths and injury of many. He condemns the use of force to disperse the protesters at the sit-in site, and he is alarmed by reports that security forces have opened fire inside medical facilities. The Secretary General reminds the Transitional Military Council of its responsibility for the safety and security of the citizens of Sudan. He urges all parties to act with the utmost restraint. This includes responsibility for upholding the human rights of all citizens, including the right of freedom of assembly and of expression. The Secretary General also calls for the unimpeded access to deliver essential care at the sit-in site in Khartoum and in hospitals where the wounded are treated. The Secretary General urges the Sudanese authorities to facilitate an independent investigation into the deaths and to hold those responsible accountable. The Secretary General urges the parties to pursue peaceful dialogue and to stay the course in the negotiations over the transfer of power to a civilian-led transitional authority as required by the African Union. The United Nations is committed to working with the African Union in support of this process and stands ready to support the Sudanese stakeholders in their efforts to build a lasting peace. That statement should have been issued as we speak. And you will have seen that over the weekend we issued a statement from the Secretary General to the International Donors Conference in Mozambique to help people of the country in the wake of the devastation caused by cyclones Idai and Kenneth. The Secretary General noted that the United Nations and its humanitarian partners were on the ground from the start of the crisis to support the government's efforts, as well as to provide food, water, shelter, and medicine. The Secretary General reiterated his appeal to the generosity of the international community, stressing that these weather-related catastrophes warn us about the urgency of tackling climate change. More than 700 people from governments, international organizations, and others took part in the two-day conference, which wrapped up with pledges and announcements totaling $1.2 billion. Secretary General also sent a video message to the Women Deliver conference taking place in Vancouver in Canada. In the message to the participants, he stressed that gender equality has been one of his top priorities and that the United Nations will continue to work to achieve gender parity, not just at the senior level, but across the whole system. He also reiterated that gender equality is essential to question of power and encouraged participants to use their power to build a world where women and men have equal rights and opportunities. That message is available. And turning to Syria, just to say that the United Nations remains deeply alarmed by the ongoing hostilities in the de-escalation zone in northwestern Syria, which have resulted in at least 160 civilian deaths, left hundreds of thousands of people displaced, and put 3 million people in the crossfire. Shelling and airstrikes, including the use of barrel bombs, continue in Idlib, in western Aleppo, and in northern Hama. Some 307,000 people were displaced between the 1st and the 22nd of May. Most of them are living outside camps and reception centers. In Idlib alone, about 100 schools are now hosting displaced people. The food security and livelihoods of millions of people across Hama, Idlib, and Aleppo is at risk following the destruction of crops, farmland, and other disruption to farming. The United Nations and humanitarian partners are responding within the de-escalation area. In May, the World Food Programme distributed ready-to-eat rations to 190,000 newly displaced people in the area. And turning to Somalia, over the weekend, the acting head of the UN mission in Somalia, Ray Zenenga, strongly condemned the murder of a UN local security assistant as he was leaving his mosque in the city of Galkayo. So far, no one has claimed responsibility for killing Mohammed Abdi Kaire. The acting head of the UN mission said Mr. Kaire served at the UN's Department of Safety and Security with distinction and urged authorities to spare no efforts to find those responsible for his death. And just wanted to flag that from the UN mission in Mali, they've reported to us that UN facilities were targeted in 2 separate indirect fire attacks this past weekend. Explosions were heard near the airstrip at the UN camp in Timbuktu, with no reported casualties or damage. The UN mission dispatched a quick reaction force in response. This incident comes after 3 mortar rounds were directed at a UN peacekeeping camp in Tessalit in the Kidal region on Saturday, also thankfully with no resulting casualties or damage. And from the Central African Republic, our peacekeeping colleagues there tell us that the UN mission launched a new phase in operation in the western part of the country to respond to attacks by armed group known as the 3R. That group carried out attacks late last month on 2 villages that resulted in 34 deaths, including a child, in violation of the peace agreement in the country. Since then, the group has apologized for its role in the attacks. A joint mission by the government, the UN, the African Union, and the Economic Community of Central Africa states met last week with leaders of the 3R, who said he wants to cooperate with the authorities in the investigation of the attacks. And UNICEF today said that more than 5 million families across Africa, Asia, and Latin America and the Caribbean spend over 40% of their non-food household expenses on maternal health services every year. Nearly 2/3 of these households, or around 3 million, are in Asia, while approximately 1.9 million are in Africa. According to UNICEF's latest analysis, the cost of prenatal care and delivery services can deter pregnant women from seeking medical attention, endangering the lives of mothers and their babies, and particularly affects poor mothers in developing countries. UNICEF says that despite progress, over 800 women still die every day from pregnancy-related complications, and 7,000 babies die in the first month of life. More information online. And today is a very important day. Today is
World Bicycle Day.
Exactly. It is World Bicycle Day. Not only do you get good shape, you get nice legs. The bicycle is a simple, affordable, reliable, clean, and environmentally fit, sustainable means of transportation. It also conveys a positive message to foster sustainable consumption and production and has a positive impact on the climate. The day seeks to encourage member states to devote particular attention to the bicycle and development strategy and to include bicycle in international, regional, national, and sub-national development policies. After I'm done here, 1 p.m., there will be a briefing by the foreign ministers of Canada, Peru, Chile on the situation in Venezuela. As you know, they are here to partake in Venezuela-related meetings. And then at 3 p.m., Ambassador Mansour al-Otaibi, the permanent representative of Kuwait and president of the Security Council for the month of June, will be here to brief you on the program of work. Tomorrow at 1 p.m., there will be a press briefing organized by our colleagues from UNRWA, Matthias Schmal, the director of UNRWA's operations in Gaza, and Gwyn Lewis, the director of UNRWA's operations in the West Bank, will be here to brief you on all the work that UNRWA does. Sir.
So it's some follow-ups on the important statement that you read on Sudan. The Sudan Military Council issued a statement in which it said its operation was to, I quote, cleanse some sites and arrest outlaws and criminals, and yet most of the reports we've seen are that these are innocent protesters. So what does the UN and the Secretary-General make of that statement? And what information is the UN itself able to gather on the ground in Khartoum?
Sure.
What level of staff do you have there? And you have appointed a point man, Mr. Haysom, who I believe was in New York at the end of last week. Can you tell us where he is and what he's doing?
Mr. Haysom, I believe, is in New York. I will double-check on that. His role is to represent the Secretary-General in our efforts to support the African Union's efforts in helping with the transition in Sudan. As you know, we have quite a large UN presence in Sudan, and including Khartoum, and obviously in Darfur as part of the joint mission with the African Union. As far as I'm aware, all our staff are safe and sound and accounted for. I'm not going to read within the tea leaves of that statement, which I hear for the first time. What is clear to us is that there was use of excessive force by the security forces on civilians. People have died. People have been injured. It is a basic human right for people to be able to demonstrate freely and peacefully, and that right needs to be respected.
Could I follow up just with a request rather than a question? Could Mr. Haysom be made available to the press corps so he can
I
speak to
will
us?
pass that request along. Sida Reis.
Thank you, Stefan. Just to follow up on James' question, concerning the call by the Secretary General on the Sudanese council, military council, to transfer to a civilian authority. The African Union first put 3 months period in their demands to the. Does the Secretary General have a time frame in mind when he put that statement out, or is it open?
No, I think the Secretary General, as we say in the statement, we are working with and in support of the African Union's efforts.
To that question,
I think he still has a follow-up to his own question. Or he looks dissatisfied with my answer. I can never tell. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
I mean, beside the statement, did the Secretary General do anything? Did he take any action? Did he call anyone? Did he try to get something from the field, talk to anyone?
We have people. Our contacts are being had at various levels. As I said, Mr. Haysom is our point person on this issue. Mr. Sato.
Thank you, Stefan. So, top leadership of the Sudan's Military Council visited Egypt and Saudi Arabia, and this massacre happened. What does Secretary General's view on why the situation has escalated to this point?
Okay. I'm not going to analyze the travel pattern of the current leadership in Sudan. The analysis is best left up to you. What is clear, obviously, and this is an obvious fact, is that the dialogue that had been going on between the Transitional Military Council and the representatives of the of civil society and the protesters have not borne fruit. It is important that the parties pursue a meaningful dialogue and that everything be done to avoid a further loss of life and violence. Mr. Klein.
Yes, two questions. First of all, the discussions that are going on now at UN headquarters regarding Venezuela, the foreign minister level, has the Secretary General been asked either himself or a designee to participate in those discussions? And if so,
as I checked with my colleagues a few minutes ago, we have not been asked to participate in those discussions.
All right. And my other question involves Mauritania. Several human rights groups, including Amnesty International, have put out an appeal for the next president of Mauritania to sign on to a manifesto including taking effective action against slavery that is still going on in Mauritania and discrimination against minority groups.
I haven't seen that particular statement, but it is...
Is it something, though, that the Secretary General
it goes without
shares?
saying that we stand firmly against modern-day slavery. Madam.
Stefan, on Sudan, too, in your statement, you said that the UN is ready to take or to support the efforts of the African Union. Could you elaborate exactly which role do you see there? And was anybody in contact with the representatives of the civil society in Sudan? Thank you.
Sure. Contacts has been had at various levels with the parties in Sudan. The African Union is the regional organization, obviously, taking the lead in helping Sudan transition to a civilian rule. Our efforts are in support of the African Union's own political work in that regard. Senor.
Yes, thank you, Stefan. It seems that the meetings on Norway to solve the crisis, the situation in Venezuela, is another fail in trying to find a solution to this crisis. What's the Secretary General reaction until this?
Well, we would hope that there continues to be some engagement between the parties, some serious engagement in the process. For us, serious negotiations are the only way to achieve a peaceful solution to the pressing challenges that Venezuela currently faces. Abdelhamid.
Yeah, today is the last day of Ramadan. There were thousands of people in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Israeli army evicted them by force to allow 400 settlers to tour the mosque. Are you aware of this incident, and is there any opinion on that?
I'm personally not aware, but I will look into it. That's Mr. James, and then...
Yes, another question on Sudan and then one other issue. On Sudan, given the seriousness of the situation as outlined in the Secretary-General's statement, and the fact there's a US peacekeeping mission in the country, more than one, does the Secretary-General feel it would be appropriate for the Security Council now to meet on this issue?
I think that's a question you will need to ask the President of the Security Council. I think it is clear that the current situation, the incidents that we're seeing in Khartoum are of the utmost importance.
The other question was some follow-up to what Farhan was telling us at the end of last week, which is Mr. Mladinov has not so far received an invitation to the Israel-Palestine Economic Conference in Bahrain. Is that still the
I have
situation?
no updates on that.
And if that is still the situation, given the UN's important and historic role in the Middle East peace process, member of the quartet, does the Secretary-General feel this is a snub?
No, we're doing some double assumptions here. So there's been no change in the status. Obviously, once something changes, we can express an opinion on whatever that change is. Sir, Madam, sorry. Go ahead.
Please.
Well,
Decide amongst yourselves.
The purpose of the Bahrain conference is to abolish UNRWA, and there's no reaction here.
I will let you. It's not to me to interpret what the purpose of the conference is.
Well, no, that has been said. I mean, Mr. Greenblatt was here and said it. Yeah.
So, our support for UNRWA and the critical work that they do in the region could not be clearer.
While I have the mic, any reaction to the conflict, to the U.S. conflict with Mexico, the new tariffs, and is there any reaction from UNHCR? Anyone looking at the border situation?
I mean, on the border issue, I think UNHCR has spoken and UNICEF has as well. But I have nothing for you on the trade part.
We were expecting, Steph, the report of CAC, Children in Armed Conflict, this month. Do you have a time for its public release?
Someone must have a time for its public release. It's usually a little later, but I will double check for you. You're very welcome. Yes, sir.
Thank you. May I have Secretary General's comment on 30 years anniversary of Tiananmen case, please?
No, I have no particular comment on that. Okay. Thank you very much. See you tomorrow. Yes. Damn.